Okay, so we're gonna go ahead, I don't know if the mayor needs to call the work session to order, but I'm gonna go ahead and get it. Go ahead, Mayor. Sorry, as he takes a bite on.
Sorry.
Months by.
Call the council meeting to order since it is a council meeting. We're joined by Councilmember Cerisi, Councilmember Martinez, Councilmember Shiltz. Who else is here?
And I have Councilmember Dominguez and Councilmember McFerren on.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Need approval of the agenda?
Nope.
Okay. This is a work session.
Okay, during the process, if any of our departments recognize something that doesn't appear to look correct to them based on our meetings or our discussions or what you've submitted for your budget worksheets, just email me and I'll go through those. There have been some adjustments as I've tried to go through balancing the budget and the process, but for the most part right now, everything has been put in place as submitted. That does not mean by the time of the final approval of the budget that those items will be there. Simply because bonding compliance, I need to estimate to make sure that we're in compliance with any bonds that are tied to our funds, our utility and our general funds. In addition to that, we're in the process of a general obligation bond for East 6th Street. I've estimated typically when we go the first fiscal year, that's just an interest payment. So based on my conversations with UMB, I've estimated a interest payment in here. So with that said, we'll just go ahead and we'll get started. So here's the good news. We're currently right now at a gap of a negative 161.4 for general fund. Just as a reminder, the general fund encompasses emergency services, also from a perspective of how the budgeting works is by function. So we have financial administration, we have public safety, we have streets, and parks and rec is part of the culture and recreation along with the library. So within that, currently right now, we're estimating 3.9 in revenue. We'll go through and we'll talk about where those revenues come from because I assure you they are not property tax dollars. These are, let me back up. This is a combination of what each of our general fund functions can create in revenue. So for example, the police department, they have revenue generation through car inspections, fines, parking fines, doing fingerprinting, and people requesting reports. So they bring in some of the revenue. In addition to that, Parks and Rec has revenue through field rentals, shelter rentals, but we are very limited when it comes to charges for service for a general fund. Property tax is general property tax, or the property taxes each property owner pays their portion. And then on top of that, the city has the ability to right now currently levy employee benefits. So a bigger portion of the other revenues that come into the general fund are then from those levies that we are able to do at this time through employee benefits and our self-funding, or also known as tort liability. Those are very minimal. So with all of that said, as we're going through here, just to be clear, when we get to an actual the Iowa budget format, you will be able then to see what our valuation property tax is, which has decreased because we are capped for growth, and that'll be part of our conversation starting off first. So currently right now, what we will have to do is we're going to have to close the gap of this negative 161,000 because it is not fiscal for us to present a budget carrying a negative. Is there a chance, because we have an unrestricted balance in our general fund, that we could implement with the negative? Yes, but again, it's not good fiscal management, especially with completing an audit and, the auditor calling our attention to that. We don't have restricted monies, we're not, in a position where we have the ability to leverage that gap with our balances that we hold right now in general fund, so. Okay. So the general fund property tax revenue of $822,773 forms the backbone of funding for our essential services, including police, fire, streets, and parks. The general fund also includes local option sales tax, half of 1/3 in the estimated amount. So 101 is half. So just to clarify this, our estimated income on local option sales tax is around $609,000. Based on our referendum that we have, that total estimate gets divided into thirds. So 1/3 of that is to support our general property tax support. So we can use that to make up for our shortfall. And I assure you, we're still at a gap because we have included that in there. The other portion of that then goes to capital projects. So those are dollars that are part of our referendum that we voted to say, that's the portion that we are going to set aside for capital projects, specifically street projects, our curb and gutter, our sidewalks, even helping out paying on the current bonds that we're working on. And then in addition, then the last third of it is split in half between the library and the Parks and Rec. So their estimate between their splits is around $101,000. And those are to be identified for operational expenses. And again, in an essence, it does close a gap on some of their revenue that they don't get through property tax, but we are to identify specific projects that those all are going to be used for. I'm just taking you back to what the auditor had communicated. Is we create how each of those dollars are being sent to the public. We are currently doing what we're supposed to do, but we just need to make sure we're getting an itemized outline to identify each year how those dollars are appropriated to the budget. The total general fund revenue stands at approximately 3.99, what we talked about, but unfortunately our expenses are 4.16, and that's just, they are what they are. I mean, these are the bare bones to operate our general fund. This isn't, other than, outside of, how do I want to say, this does not include any major capital projects. This is what it takes just to operate and provide the services that we're currently providing at this time. And as we know, the public wants more, understandably, because a bigger portion of our cost is the quality of life and programming that we provide, which attracts, folks to come to our community. Tourism side of it is the attraction of parks, being able to have, activities at Dutton Center. And just recently, as we know, the pool, and that'll be more discussion for us to have. The state imposed levy limits restricting future property tax growth. So current legislation, without getting into any political conversation, the best I can, is just that legislation believed that there needed to be a cap for city municipalities to manage property tax reform. Their constituents were saying their property taxes are too high. So legislation, this is their process in order to, identify that and meet what your constituents are communicating. Balancing the budget is not solely about spending choices, but it is fundamentally constrained by legislative caps on revenue growth that limit fiscal flexibility. We simply cannot exceed that cap. So even if knowing that we need to, or knowing that we want to, it's a compliance measurement. The city simply cannot do that. The structural challenge requires council to make some strategic decisions about service levels, staffing, capital investments, and alternative revenue sources. So that's, the creative side, as we're not in this alone. Cities across Iowa are faced with this complicated matter. I'm going to say that when I first started working through this budget, our gap was around 300 and some thousand. And at this point in time, we've been able to get it to this gap. And but it will definitely have an impact on staffing, and it's going to have an impact on services and the hours that we can provide programming to our community. So with the Iowa property tax relief, just quickly letting you know, again, you're still at the 810, that's the maximum. Once we start looking at the Iowa budget form, we can provide everybody a little more detail on what we're looking at that form and how we can relate. The clerk and I just completed the max tax levy. That needed to be turned into the Muscatine County Auditor a couple of days. They send a letter to the property tax owners letting them know that this is where our cap is at as far as their property tax percentage. What this does not include is debt. So at this point in time, legislation still allows the city to put additional levy on top of our 810 for debt and for employee benefits like we were talking about. However, that is currently on the dockets right now with legislation on how even tax increment finance, how debt levy, how all of those tools that cities utilize to have growth and to support our services and our programming, could even make it even more difficult and widen the gap even more on where we've got to come up with funding. Our employee benefits and the ability to cover liability with insurance. We know storm damage has become a huge, not only an impact on, private owners, personal homes, commercial, but has been an impact on cities as well, as far as covering all of our buildings and grounds and our equipment due to those rising costs. Employee benefits, as such, I mean, if the cost of living goes up, then the simplest form is that yes, then we should be able to meet competitive wage markets, whether it be in the private sector and the public sector. And we as a city have worked very hard to bring wages into a more competitive market to the best of our ability. But that continues to be difficult when you are limited from a compliance on growth. And as we get through here, we'll talk a little bit more is the general fund cannot be supported by proprietary money. Proprietary money is to manage those utilities. There are some cases where proprietary money can provide some funding into our programming, but the idea is that, the general fund shouldn't be dependent upon proprietary revenues, because when we're borrowing from that, it's taking away from the infrastructure and the ability to reserve and be prepared for improvements in that area. I gotta move okay. So the biggest part, I don't think it's any shocker, is from a public safety funding demand. You're required by law to fund public safety. We're required by law to have, and when I say law, Iowa code, we're required to have a police presence. We are required to have fire, and EMS service, again, is not an essential service currently right now in Muscatine County. However, can you imagine trying to operate without an EMS service? You simply cannot. I know that's another thing at the county level. We've had conversations wanting to get the EMS recognized, so there can be a plan on how we can levy for ambulance service. But right now, the city, the property tax, our general levy only permits us to really fund the fire service. Charges for service right now under our ambulance side is their ambulance billing. However, that is a very short revenue compared to what the need is in order to operate that. As we all know that we're in the midst of a transfer to the fire and EMS agency. And so we still have an obligation though, from a contract, from the contract, the agreement, the MOU of understanding that we're going to provide funding to that agency in order for us to continue to operate the fire and the EMS. The largest part of this is the police department. The police department, when you have a 24-hour, 7 days a week service, I mean, and you have competitive wage and you're looking for quality officers, not quantity, there's a cost to doing that. But even for them, because of the need for having officers patrolling and officers covering our community, they have to cut out a lot of, operational supplies. Sometimes training has to be cut in order for us to operate that service. So I've included some bar graphs in there just to try to get a visual perspective on what the specifics to the public safety department budgets look like from our property tax. So from a department breakdown, the general fund supports police and fire. I'm not going to go over it, but I feel like we've hit that. We know rising personal materials and service costs, impact us as far as how we are collecting revenue. Do we get creative and come up with more revenue options from the public? I mean, again, you're a public entity. We already have the public, frustrated because of property tax. So do we send them a bill when a police officer has to go to their home for, public safety? Do we send them an additional bill when we've got to patch a hole in their street? And those are things that, again, we're not permitted to do. The non-safety departments face deferred purchases. So from our library and our public, or from our parks and rec, and even building inspections, they're all impacted by having to cut their budgets more than half. And again, when you need to provide staffing to maintenance, our square footage that we have, or I would say our acreage of our parks. And then we look at our library and the programming that we know our community wants, and we want to provide it. But again, I go back to, we're limited on what we can provide for that revenue. The street maintenance, of course, comes through road use tax money. So for the most part, we can plan without growth, though, and adding more streets. Well, let me say this. When we grow and we add more streets, there's more costs. But also, there's supposed to be the capability of having road use tax dollars to help offset that. Unfortunately, those are minimum tax dollars that we get in, and it's always based on an estimate. The need is much higher, especially for staffing individuals to serve those streets and to fix those streets. I would say that that's where some of our benefit of having the local option sales tax dollars do come in, because we're able to levy some of those dollars. Well, let me back up. I don't want to use the word levy. We're able to utilize from that referendum a percentage of that money to help out with some of those costs. Anybody need a break yet? Am I taking to sleep? Okay. Building inspections is also part of public safety, because we have a city code, we have an ordinance that we, meet those building requirements to keep the public safe, to identify, from those projects. That's part of our growth. We do get charges for service from these items that ideally would help offset the cost for inspection. And we've been pretty close with that revenue in the last couple of years. But again, that can go away quickly if we stop developing and we stop growing. But it's a double-edged sword because we also have legislation say, whoa, but you can't have this much money, but we want you to grow. We want you to develop. Those in with what makes up in here, you will have Eddie as a, and we have contractual service now with Terry Bird. So just for your understanding. We have a little bit more budget in there for training because we are working with Eddie to get him trained. So we can have more of a full-time individual, having a full-time individual here daily to handle inspections. However, even with Cody in the room, with Terry and that level of inspection, that takes a lot of training and it takes certifications. So we are fortunate that we're able to contract yet with Terry at that cost. Because if we were looking at a full-time building inspector, we would probably be somewhere between 110 to 120,000 if we were lucky on an annual basis to have all the certifications that Terry provides. Animal control, very essential service in our community, which Eddie and our police department assist with that. And I know that we do have some other staff that assist when Eddie's out of the office, but there is a cost to that. And there's a cost when people are not managing and caring for their animals. There's the responsibility, and it's public safety as well, to make sure that we are managing animals and handling them. Fees on the licensing and those things, I mean, they're low cost. Because honestly, to own a pet is not terribly affordable these days, but part of those fees then help cover when we have to take animals to Muscatine County Humane Society, or when we have to have an animal euthanized because of bad behavior. But this doesn't include, the bigger part of it is dogs. But we have a feral cat population. And in addition to that, we do have a little bit of wildlife population. Speaking specifically here at the CAB, we have some really naughty squirrels. So as we do throughout our community. Any questions so far? Moving into the library department. So our beautiful library, again, operation wise, they're a 2-story library, and both floors have to have staffing. They have to have that staffing covering programming, the materials, and just the general maintenance of the building itself. It's unfortunate. I want to try to say this in a nice way. All buildings, even our own homes, it is a constant maintenance. And we all know, even on our personal lives, that, not having a plan or not understanding what our maintenance costs will get caught off guard. And the next thing you know, you've got to come up with money for a heater and money for a water heater, or your roof needs to be replaced. So, our library director, and same with all of our department heads, are doing, the best that they can do with what they have from funding to work with. So right now, again, based on our calculations, the library, I calculate 20% of the property tax revenue that comes in to allocate towards their budget, along with their third of their of the local option sales tax. So on top of that, then they also bring revenue in from outside sources such as Muscatine County, City of Nichols, City of Atalissa, and we get some state funding from the Library Association. Unfortunately, those individuals do not see the value in the library, and they're very limited as to the funding that they provide our library. So the bigger portion of it has to be funded through the city's property tax. But then again, they have staffing that we need competitive wages on and that they receive their benefits. So with that said, I know the library director, she's slimmed down her, stuff as much as she can. I did take out the capital project out of this, because part of budget building is you have to identify that you know for a fact you have revenue in order to offset the expense. Those are things that we would do through the budget amendment, when that time comes and we get going back there. Right now, we know we have a roof that needs to be repaired. And council will have an upcoming budget amendment for us this year in order to start the work on repairing that roof. Because as we all know, if it's leaking from up above, everything down below is only gonna get worse. And fun with Parks and Rec these days, right? We're gonna just code all of our Parks and Rec this day and just focus solely on the pool. That doesn't work like that, does it? When you have a pool that's been operating on a negative $80-some thousand every year, let's just be clear, by closing the pool and not operating the pool this summer, it does not provide us additional budget money. Especially when you're already in a negative 161,000 for a gap. So I just want to get that out there right now, is that by temporarily taking a break from the pool doesn't provide us additional funding. What it does provide for is, though, I built in here using knowing what we're gonna get from local option sales tax, is getting the process started on having the engineers, as we have communicated, get the engineers in here and dig in and find out what are our future options and what is the sustainabilities of those options. In addition to that, there is nothing going to be done at the pool that's not going to be more than $1 million. And so when you're looking at that amount, then it will need to go to a referendum for our public to vote on, which will require 60% of the vote. There is a lot of work that has to go into this. And so there is going to be a decision and a process going forward. And we have stated that we will communicate that to the public and we'll keep them informed as we're working through that. In the meantime, we still have a public that wants more trails. We still have a public that wants amenities improved at the Dutton complex. And most importantly, and I forgot to write down the acres, but we have to maintain a cemetery in all of our park grounds and our buildings in the process. So given what their revenue is, this is just the parks. We haven't even hit recreation and cemetery yet. The recreation department is primarily our programming when it comes to youth sports, comes to summer camp activities, our leagues, our basketball camps, those types of things. So they do have the ability to create a little revenue on their own. Unfortunately, in order to run the programming, there's a little more cost, but again, that's the quality of life that taxpayers and what attract people to be a part of Westwood, one of them here. And as you're looking through this information, you'll see that there is a continual theme, and it's personnel and it's wages and it's benefits. But we cannot run any of these things without those individuals. The cemetery, I mean, we certainly could afford to do some more investment into our cemetery. Right now, I mean, we are managing some decent revenue, because we still have some burial lots available, and we, have our remains, with that, and those seem to be going well. But it comes down to the seasonal and the maintenance and the equipment to maintain that. Here's our pool. And I'm not gonna go into that one much more. We pretty much identified, but I did identify, I think 50,000 is on the low side, for engineering costs. But again, when we're already working with a gap, those are things that we're gonna have to determine. I know that we do have a meeting scheduled with ISG, to get a plan put together is essentially what we're gonna start working with them on. And so we'll bring that back to the council to let you know, and to the public. The financial administration department, so this is a percentage of, mayor and council. This is a percentage of your city clerk, your deputy city clerk, and your city manager who administrate, all of the departments and likewise, our building costs. So then in addition to that, we have economic development that is a part of that. So with our We Lead percentages that we have an agreement with them, with our matching grants and with our Catalyst grant, we do have one that's in place right now. Hopefully we'll get notified that we've got another one because that's what's helping revitalize our downtown area. Am I going too fast, or anybody have any questions? You want me to stop for a second, or? Okay, roadway maintenance, so we were talking earlier, this is our estimated road use tax revenue. If any of you, mayor or council, if you happen to read through the tax bulletin, that provides you where we pull our estimates for this year, fiscal year 26-27. It's $140 per our population. And so there's where our estimate is at. And again, the bigger part of our costs are employees, but it is general maintenance on our streets as well. Within the road use, we do not have capital projects, because a bigger portion of that is costs or just maintaining what we have. Any questions on that? I know capital equipment, I just want to point out, Adam has two vehicles that we have budgeted for the fleet that's needing upgraded. That includes having a plow as a part of that. We've talked in dependent on where we end at the year with our balances, because through our audit, we had some correcting entries to make. But it will depend on where we end out the end of the year on June 30th to see what or how much of our capital equipment that we can afford to have in there. Street cleaning is a part of that streets. This is on the low side. I don't want to jinx it, but we've been fortunate, for when we do have snow events, they're short term. So that's been helpful. We paid off our street cleaning equipment a year ago, so we no longer have debt on that. However, it will be time to start looking at replacing that, or at least having a reserve equipment fund to replace it in the future. So just a quick summary for the departments. This just provides you what we've already went through and talked about. The bigger part of this is, okay, this section is being the general fund, not going into proprietary money yet. So here's the enterprise funds. So currently right now, what we're doing is this is estimated based on council's action with imposed rates. The new rates that are effective July 1 of 2026, based on current consumption use. This is what our estimate is right now for those revenues. Could be up a little bit, could be down, just depends on consumption. Let's talk about water. So we know we've got some capital equipment needed for our water. We've got projects that are also been identified for water. This fiscal year of 26-27, there's going to have to be some work with our financial advisor, because I think we're gonna need to take a look at these larger projects such as the loop that we've been talking about. That would definitely need to be a bonded project, a revenue bond project. With again, it's something we have to do. We have to upgrade that infrastructure in order to support what's already existing, because our water pressure is compromised by what we already have on the west side of the city. And that pressure needs to be addressed, and it's needed to be addressed for a long period of time. The other side of it is, at any point in time with more growth, and even with what the school has done, we need to have that project in order to meet the needs of that water pressure on that side of the community. We've already got identified development to the north of town. And again, the sewer and the water are really very much tied to that section of town in order to meet that infrastructure need for that growth. But at the same time, we have compliance that we are required to meet with copper and lead. So we have that with our existing infrastructure. In addition to that, as our water department will tell you, no differently than our electric and streets, it's like every day is a surprise, because there's infrastructure that, because we can't see it every day, that it gives us a surprise that it's in a poor situation and needs to be fixed. So it becomes an emergency fix. But as of right now, here's what we got. And again, as I stated, as we started the conversation, it will be identifying that our estimate on our operating expenses versus our revenue meet our compliance when it comes to our bond covenants. But what all of us have been working really hard to do for the last 5 years is creating a revenue over expenditure so we can reinvest in restricting monies for infrastructure improvements in the future. We simply have had difficulty doing that because, like I said, every time we turn around, we get another emergency fix that depletes that expense from the revenue at the end of the fiscal year. In addition to that, recently updating the rates because they hadn't been done on a timely basis, we're gonna need some time, and again, having mayor and council that stays on top of that. And having staff that continually is taking a look at where are we falling below where we need to be is essential to making sure that we can get to the point where we can reserve funding for improvements in the future. At the same time, growth is important because we have the same utility customers that are continually feeling the impact of utility increase. So part of growth would also be being able to spread out that cost a little bit more. But as I said, it's a double-edged sword because it costs to build and maintain. The sewer utility from collections to treatment. For the most part, the water department, they serve the collection systems on the streets. We've got some improvements, we've got some compliance there as far as the collection systems and getting some generators, emergency generators put on our lift station. We currently right now are in the process of doing our state revolving fund for the first phase, which is a large phase at the wastewater treatment plant. But a much needed phase because I think it's been over 30 years since the last major upgrade has occurred at the wastewater treatment plant. Currently in conversation, starting communications with West Liberty Foods, talking to them about the shared responsibility because a bigger part of that upgrade is for processing and doing the work that they're sending us. And again, not having that and having a solution or a creative agreement to understand that, excuse me, gosh forbid if West Liberty Foods is no longer operating, it's the responsibility of this mayor and council and city administration to make sure that our utility customers are not impacted and have to carry those costs for whatever reason, if the industry is no longer operating. So we are currently in a conversation and we are working on this steps. A bigger part of their cost will come through rates. But we look to have a conversation with them to see if there's any other possibility of, doing an upfront funding versus rates, or tying an agreement that to their property that states that, and this is common because this is what's been done in the past with Lewis Rich. Tying it to say, if the facility no longer operates, essentially our utility customers are taken care of, so they're not feeling the burden of that. The electric utility operations, we've had lots of conversations. We've got a lot of things going on. In addition to that, we have a lot of work too that's being identified in our infrastructure and improvements and upgrades. Generation is costly for us to maintain, but it could be also a great revenue generator if we can get our generation to where it needs to be. But at the same time, it takes staffing in order to, to cover that. And not only are they doing the generation work, but they're also covering the transmission lines within our community. And we got a lot of infrastructure upgrades. And along with that, in order to protect that infrastructure, we're identifying that if we have the opportunity to bury that transmission line, it certainly saves us money in the future from constantly having to update poles. The transmission lines are better under the ground versus, like I said before, all of our storm damage. Cody and I work with FEMA. We do have a mitigation project that's going to come up on 8th Street, 7th. Remind me again, Cody, where was our Cat CD?
Yeah, 8th, 8th and 7th.
And then part of it, East 6th Street, part of that is to bury that as well. So, so with all of that said, and then in addition to that, we have the compliance of the existing bond that we have to maintain revenues. And the other side of that is, we want to be able to put dollars back at the end of the year to restrict money for future improvements. Here's a little bit of a bar I provided you based on our estimates of our budget. I mean, as you can see, as we've been talking about, the bigger part of our expenses are purchasing that wholesale power. Then we have the electric department, the transmission, the operations, operating the generations. Our capital investments, those would be the capital projects that we've identified as a part of this budget. And then administrative costs is our utility billing clerks, some of our city clerks dollars, some of the city managers. That makes up from a revenue, how it looks there on the bar. I mean, again, administrative costs are estimated. Last year I did the numbers and we were 5% of the electric revenue. So 5% of this revenue. I hadn't had a chance to do the water and sewer yet, but essentially all of like your administrative folks that do the billing, that do the management of any administration with the utility are approximately, I'm going to say, sorry, electric was just under 10%. And I believe the water and the sewer are around 5 to 8% of their revenue for administrative costs. So we work hard to reduce those administrative costs because we know that the infrastructure and the folks that are in the departments operating the utility is where we need to make sure that we're focusing on our financial support.
Lee, I'd like to add that we have a administrative cost built into our wholesale structure as well with our PGF.
And for us, it's all, the wholesale power is based on those estimates.
Yes, built in.
Yep. Yep. So solid waste and the stormwater utility, first of all, solid waste is doing much better. I'm happy to announce that if our estimates come to fruition, we will have ended the year on a positive balance in the solid waste. Hats off to Clerk Clerk Hoffert and to Public Works Director Adam Reinhardt for their work on that fund. Ever since I mean, I've been with the city for 14 years and that fund has struggled, because again, like everything, it's not even just the staffing, but in order for us to remove solid waste from our community at the weight we're moving it, there's a cost to do that. We invested in a recycling program, and about the time we invested in that recycling program, the market went,
Still is.
it's still not the best, but but again, I mean, we're providing a program and doing an environment, the whole idea was environmental. And so we have a pretty active community when it comes to recycling. So we are, and at any point in time, I know Adam, usually on an annual basis, he provides you a report and gives you the weights of recycling versus the weight of solid waste that's going to the landfill. Unfortunately, those are rising costs in order to get rid of those things. And the equipment that we're using to remove solid waste from the community is very costly, and it has a lot of wear and tear on it. And so those are the bigger percentage outside of the wages to support the staff that are providing the service, but it's the equipment itself and the landfill that has really taken a big impact on how much money we are not able to reserve for future. However, I will say, the Public Works Department, they're doing a lot of their maintenance themselves on this equipment without the bigger stuff. And so that helps when it comes to equipment repairs. And likewise, getting the mayor and council to understand, where we needed to be with solid waste rates and getting that implemented will really help that programming continue to grow and allow us to reserve money for our next purchase of a garbage truck, because what are they, just shy of $1 million now?
The automated's probably up to 450.
Yeah. Much. Stormwater funds, we started in 2020. I think we implemented in 2021 actually, as far as the fees go, and we're continuing to grow that. But I have identified with Austin and with Edgar and their team that we do have some stormwater repairs that we're going to be looking at doing. Along with that, there'll probably be a percentage that covers the East 6th Street bond if it provides for those upgraded costs there too. So, but we're continuing to grow. It's doing what it should be doing right now, but it will be time for us to review those costs. We'll be working with ISG on that, doing another study to see if our costs are where we need to be in order to meet those needs as far as infrastructure or even street improvement. So here just provides a breakout of the capital projects overview. Right now, as we're saying, we've got the bond proceeds. This is including 2026. Like I said, the 50,000 is what I've got estimated for an interest payment, but this is the total debt that we have to pay on in fiscal year 26-27. Local option sales tax is going to come into these capital projects. Those capital dollars from local option sales tax primarily are budgeted for improvements and street improvements. They are not to pay the bond proceeds. Those are through property tax levies and utility revenue. And then again, talking about what our availability is and then what the cost of right now we have estimated on the East 6th Street project. I'm just looking at my numbers because it was getting late that night when I was putting it together. So if you see something that doesn't make sense, just please email me and let me know. Debt service is the fund that, the city, again, we utilize debt service. We're also required from a government accounting standard. That we place, the funds that we're taking in from property tax. As we were talking about earlier, levy, we are still capable of levying, in addition to our 810 to pay for general obligation debt. The other debt that we have would be our enterprise debt, and that comes from enterprise. It doesn't have to come from what we know is the debt fund. And again, these are things that we can identify when we're looking at a treasurer's report. You'll see those funds identified specifically as capital, or streets, or you'll see it say debt. And so that is the fund that we're talking about here. We're talking about just our overall debt. We will get an updated debt report from UNB. Once we complete the 2026, then we get an updated report that goes over our debt. It lets us know where our percentages are at because we have to maintain a percentage. Essentially, it's kind of like your own debt. You know, you have a debt to income ratio, and so cities have that same requirement. The tax increment finance and how we're still able to utilize it, like I said, this is something that legislation is currently talking about. What they're looking at doing is removing the tools that provide to our developers, to economic development for marketing and promoting, to bring interest for industries, or for housing development. They're primarily looking at, seeking that tax increment finance can only be utilized for streets or infrastructure. That is of a truly, a public, opportunity. If this does occur, or how that's looking to occur, that will definitely be another blow to communities and how they grow. Because we are dependent on tax increment financing for our matching funds, because we've already seen the growth that has occurred in the downtown district with that revitalization. We were looking to try to start moving those programs out into the community to help private or to help personal homeowners with their homes. This is a tool that's used to clean up slum and blight areas in communities. It is definitely for infrastructure and for public purposes, but more so cities are utilizing it for those types of opportunities with developers and having them come in and interest their investment into our community. Then along with that, we're able to levy tax increment finance for paying down our debt as well. So we're not having to, because we do want to keep our property tax dollars affordable the best that we can. And so therefore, we're also levying tax increment finance essentially too, to help pay for some of our debt. Currently, right now, as of this year, we will be done on the Short Street tax increment finance rebates, and we will be solely looking at BICE. But we do have two potential housing additions that are interested in having a tax increment finance. So just a snapshot of revenue versus expenses. Just a bar graph here. Here's our gap that we need to work on closing. And I just listed potential strategic options that we as staff and mayor and council can take a look at in order to close that gap. But it's not just about closing the gap, it's also about even the overall picture to say, is there more that we can be doing from a fiscal perspective on all of our operating funds? You know, are there things that for example, the clerk and I have been talking about moving more towards electronic documents. We're currently working on, cutting the paper cost even more. Since 2020, I was allowed the electronic documents, electronic signature as a legal, signature. And so it's just that continual work of cutting down those, just the paper supply in general. You know, sticky notes, believe it or not. I mean, just cutting those things out or eliminating them as much as possible. It makes a difference. And I do want to tell you, Mayor and Council, that I believe that all of our departments are doing a very good fiscal job at looking at making sure we're not being wasteful when it comes to office supplies, cleaning supplies, and along with the paper usage, but we know we can do better and we'll keep working at that, so. So again, evaluating a balancing approach here, you know, just more of what we've already been saying, what we've been talking about. What can we do? Most importantly, what we can do is we need to be in conversation with our legislation. We need to be communicating to them as employees of a municipality and leadership of a municipality, what legislation's impacts are having on. And I know that we've got a lot of comments about the pool. But if you look across the state of Iowa, there are many cities that are having to close programming, recreation, and eliminating the quality of life out of their budgets because of the tax reform. And I'm not saying that tax reform wasn't important and it needed to happen, but we don't have. I had a boss that always told me, don't bring me a problem unless you have a solution. And I strongly feel that we need to communicate some solutions to legislation, not telling them that they're doing something wrong, but say, here's some solutions. We need some funding that's going to cover the larger burden of our public safety because we have to have that. We need solutions for that. And it's also identifying what could that solution be. So it keeps me awake at night. So the next steps that we have for the implementing the budget, it will be for the clerk and myself to finish and close in that gap. I'm working with department members to see, you know, what other additional steps we can do to close those gaps. Staff implementation, I'm going to say, from a general fund perspective, there is a strong possibility that they'll have to be staff cuts. We are obligated, we cannot cut staffing in our public safety. We are obligated to maintain our operating levels in public safety. So unfortunately, we know where that impact is going to hit, and it's the staffing that make our community beautiful. And it's the staffing that provide programming and a safe haven for so many of our community members. Once we get that budget completed, then our next steps will be at the April 17th. Is it 17th? 21st meeting that we'll have for mayor and council. Part of that is public transparency. We're required by law to post the publications to the public. Continual communications with our communication specialists to make the public aware, just like today, a budget work session, going through this information with you, providing them public records if requested, talking to them more about how our budget is looking and the tax reforms and how they're impacting. And again, our jobs is all of us, all of the department heads, myself, is the continual monitoring of our budgets to make sure that we're managing, we're operating within what was budgeted and making adjustments if our estimates are falling short of what we're actually receiving throughout the year in our budget. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. So if you have any questions, if I put you to sleep, I'm sorry. I like learning tax law, but I did not, nobody wants to come up here and talk about the doom and gloom of, budgets and money. Most importantly, I want to say to mayor and council, you have a fantastic group of staff that work hard every day to bring 110% of loyalty, passion, and take initiative to make sure that they are providing the community what they want. And as a city manager, that definitely, I'm not gonna say it makes my job easier. I'm gonna say it makes it my job and what I'm doing here well worth it.
I don't have any questions online.
Councilmember McFerren, Councilmember Dominguez, do you have any questions before we close? Nope. Okay, well, thank you for taking your time on your Saturday morning. Please help yourself to more breakfast. And email me if you have any questions, or if you'd like to set up a meeting and go over information, mayor and council, because staff knows we can do that with them. Let me know and I'm happy to sit down and work with your schedules, okay?
I am gonna change, I will just document on here that we're only to present via in person, okay, so I will just document the time for culture.
Mayor, I didn't give you an opportunity to say.
No, I think, you've hit that, these are difficult times to try to balance budgets and provide the services that we come to want and respect and have in the community. I was reading stuff from Ames, and I think that they had $1 million shortfall that they're trying to fill. Marshalltown had a $500,000 shortfall that they were trying to fill. So this is very difficult for cities across the state to deal with.
And for us, I mean, I feel as though we've been handling shortfalls for a number of years now. And I also feel fortunate that that is the size of the gap that we have to close. In comparison across the state, I know that there are much larger gaps. So, okay. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.